If you are somewhat in tuned to what goes on around the financial markets, I'm sure you've seen people talk about all these huge asset managers like BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard and how they own everything, and everything is all interconnected, and conspiracy this, conspiracy that, blah, 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 blah. But if you look at the real players and who is actually owning and dominating industries, Blackstone are those guys in real estate. Not just real estate, they do a lot of other things. But if you look at the gap between Blackstone and everyone else in real estate, it kind of looks like Blackstone buys everything. Now, this is not a video hating on Blackstone or giving them bad headlines. Rather, it's just a deep dive into how Blackstone dominates real estate. So let's get into it. What does it take to not just compete in real estate, but to dominate it? To buy thousands of buildings, billions of square feet, and become the landlord to entire industries? From fallen apart malls to data centers, from apartments to warehouses, they own pieces of everything. This is the story of how Blackstone built the real estate empire, how they did it, why they're still one step ahead. It all began in 1985 when Steve Schwarzman and Peter Peterson founded Blackstone as an alternative asset firm. All right, let me just give a quick backstory. Long story short, they both worked at Lehman Brothers, which was Wall Street royalty in the 70s. He met Pete Peterson, the CEO, and he saw a lot in Steve, enough to start a whole firm with him. Initially focused on buyouts and private equity, the firm's shift into real estate began in the 1990s, when prime assets were mispriced, capital was cheap, and big bets could be made quietly. They did deals with Mitt Romney's Bain Capital, bought a couple railroad companies. But real estate? They didn't touch it. They had no real estate team, no real estate track record, no real estate credibility. What they did have was Pete Peterson, former CEO of Lehman Brothers, whose Rolodex was worth more than their entire company. And that Rolodex would become their golden ticket. Their in came from a disaster, the 1990 real estate crash. The late 80s were a perfect storm. Throughout the 1980s, S&Ls were aggressively giving out high-risk real estate loans. With weak underwriting, they collapsed. The government shut down over 1,000 S&Ls and forced massive liquidations. Flood of distressed real estate onto the market, pushing prices down. Savings and loan banks collapsed. Developers defaulted. Commercial real estate imploded. Office towers sat half empty. Hotels bled cash. Landlords walked away from buildings. The government created the Resolution Trust Corporation, the RTC, to liquidate billions in distressed real estate. Real estate was radioactive, but Blackstone saw opportunity. Everything was distressed. They bought cheap hotels, foreclosed offices, RTC auctions, debt at huge discounts. That was their entry point into real estate. In 1991, Blackstone made one of the smartest hires in modern financial history. They recruited Charles John Schreiber. The quiet giant from JMB Realty, Schreiber wasn't just a real estate guy. He was the real estate guy. He had managed over $20 billion worth of deals. He knew every operator, every lender, every distressed seller. At JMB, Schreiber helped pioneer the modern institutional real estate fund model, raising billions from pensions and endowments long before private equity real estate even became an industry. He managed massive portfolios, executed complex acquisitions, and proved he could scale real estate investing globally. By the time Blackstone was looking to launch its own real estate platform, Schreiber wasn't just a good hire, he was the guy who knew how to build an empire from scratch. That's why, when he joined Blackstone in 1992, he didn't just help shape the business, he helped turn it into the most powerful real estate platform on the planet. And when LPs saw Schreiber's name attached to Blackstone, suddenly the firm had credibility, instant legitimacy. What most people don't know is that before Blackstone ever launched a real estate fund, they spent years laying the groundwork. They advised on property deals. In 1990, Blackstone did something unusual for a private equity firm with no real estate identity. They bought 65% of a hotel franchise business from Prime Motor Inns, the franchise rights for Ramada and Howard Johnson. This wasn't a typical real estate purchase. They weren't buying buildings, they were buying the business behind the hotels. That deal became Hospitality Franchise Systems. Blackstone went on a tear. In 1991, they acquired Days Inn for about $250 million. 2 years later, they bought Super 8 Motels for $125 million. This was Blackstone's first real taste of a national real estate-linked portfolio, not through ownership of hotels, but through control of the operating model behind thousands of them. This move quietly gave Blackstone a foothold in hospitality, operational expertise, national scale, and credibility with LPs who were watching them closely. Around this time, Blackstone also began dipping into commercial real estate through debt, not equity. The best example came just years later when they bought the $300 million mortgage on One Worldwide Plaza, a major New York office tower. It wasn't a flashy building buy. It was smarter. By acquiring the mortgage, Blackstone got exposure to office real estate, a senior position in the capital stack, lower risk, and the ability to take over the asset if things went sideways. These deals taught them how commercial real estate really works, how buildings make money and how they lose it. In the early 90s, Blackstone also began forming partnerships across Europe, with firms like JU Hambro Megan in the UK and Indo-Suez in France. This wasn't random. Blackstone already knew that real estate wasn't going to be a US-only game. They wanted deal flow, relationships, and boots-on-the-ground intelligence before they ever had a fund to deploy. And by 1991, they had already built their European real estate arm, years before most American firms even thought about crossing the Atlantic. So what did Blackstone actually accomplish before launching BREPI? More than most people realize, they learned operations through hotel franchises. They learned risk management through commercial real estate debt. They learned global investing through early international partnerships. They weren't raising a fund out of nowhere. They were building the playbook, a playbook that would explode in scale when the 1990 real estate crash hit and the greatest distressed buying opportunity of the century opened up. And when Blackstone finally launched their first real estate fund, they were ready. Every move they made before 1991 built the foundation for the largest real estate empire the world has ever seen. They partnered with veteran operators, they built relationships with the biggest investors in America, CalPERS, Enwisters, corporate pensions, universities, and when the real estate market collapsed in 1990, LPs began asking a simple question: who's smart enough and bold enough to buy this stuff? Blackstone had the answer. Schreiber had the playbook, and the market had the opportunity. BREP 1 was a success, and by the mid-1990s they launched BREP 2, raising over $1.6 billion from institutional investors who had witnessed the extraordinary returns of their first fund. This wasn't just growth, it was audacity. Blackstone was no longer picking small, distressed hotels. They were going after the office towers, retail complexes, industrial parks, properties others avoided, and each one was mismanaged, underperforming, ripe for transformation. The strategy was simple. The execution, ruthless. Buy low, fix fast, sell high, and most importantly, don't blink when the market panicked. But if BREP 2 was the proof, BREP 3 was the declaration. Blackstone had arrived raising roughly $3 billion. This fund allowed them to target mega portfolios, office towers, sprawling retail centers, and hospitality chains. By now, they had institutional trust from pension funds, endowments, and insurance giants. A team of real estate legends, led by John Schreiber, who could structure billion-dollar acquisitions with surgical precision. A playbook that combined financial engineering with operational mastery. BREP 3 wasn't just growth, it was a warning shot to every other investor. Blackstone wasn't here to play small, they were here to dominate the entire real estate market. By the mid-2000s, Blackstone wasn't just a private equity firm, they were a real estate juggernaut. Their strategy had evolved from opportunistic distressed buys to mega-scale platform acquisitions. At the peak of a red-hot real estate cycle, when cheap credit flooded the market and private equity giants were circling skyscrapers like sharks, Blackstone came knocking. The world's biggest alternative asset manager saw what Zell saw decades earlier. This was a Fortress A once-in-a-generation trophy. And Sam Zell, he didn't just negotiate, he orchestrated. In February 2007, Blackstone acquired EQ Office for $39 billion, Sam Zell wasn't born into real estate royalty, and from that discipline and that edge, he forged his crown jewel. He built himself brick by brick, deal by deal, in the shadows of failure and fear, distressed buildings. He bought them. Banks refusing to lend, he forced their hand. Market chaos. He smiled and leaned in. Where everyone else saw risk, Zell saw a dancing ghost of opportunity. He thrived on what scared the masses: crumbling properties, bankrupt owners, tenants in default. Some called him ruthless, others called him genius. He didn't care. By the 1980s, he had turned the city's forgotten buildings into cash-flowing machines. By the 1990s, he had perfected the art of flipping entire distressed markets on their head. He didn't just make money, he made legends out of liabilities, transforming decay into dominance. From this edge, this audacity, came his crown jewel: equity office properties, a fortress of towers stretching from coast to coast. Zell wasn't just an investor, he was a master of fear, timing, and inevitability, and the world of commercial real estate, it would never be the same. This wasn't just a real estate acquisition, it was a control play over tens of millions of square feet of prime office space across dozens of cities. Every asset offered cash flow potential and the ability to unlock hidden value through operations, leasing strategies, and financial engineering. The EQ office deal was and still is the largest leveraged buyout in real estate history, still one of the boldest trades ever executed. Zell walked away with billions, perfectly timing the top of the cycle. Months before the global financial crisis crushed office values worldwide, Blackstone took the portfolio apart, selling buildings at breakneck speed, recouping nearly all of its equity in under a year. Visualize it: massive office towers, empty lobbies, opportunity hiding in the cracks. While the market feared collapse, Blackstone pounced. In real estate, success isn't about owning buildings forever, it's about playing the cycle better than the next guy. And by that measure, EQ Office was one of the greatest wins in the history of the game. For Sam Zell, EQ Office wasn't just a company, or it was a masterpiece. He built it from the ground up into the largest office landlord in America, a coast-to-coast empire of towers, tenants, and relentless cash flow. And then, with timing that still feels impossible, Zell sold it to Blackstone in February 2007, the exact peak of the commercial real estate cycle, months before the world fell apart, months before office values were crushed, months before the GFC rewrote everything. For Zell, EQ Office was a grand slam, a billion-dollar exit that cemented his reputation as the ultimate grave dancer. He didn't just beat the market, he outsmarted an entire economic era. But Blackstone? They won too, just in a different way. They didn't buy EQ Office to own the buildings. They bought it to break it apart, to strip it, flip it, move faster than the market could crumble. And that's exactly what they did. In the first 100 days, they sold off $7 billion in assets. Within a year, they had recovered almost all their equity. Long before the crisis detonated the office sector, Blackstone was already out the door. So was EQ Office a success? That depends on what you mean by success. For Sam Zell, absolutely for Blackstone, without question for the long-term health of the office market. Not even close, but that's the lesson. EQ Office wasn't built to last forever, it was built to be timed. Bought right, scaled big, and sold with unreal precision. In the end, EQ Office wasn't just a company. It was one of the greatest trades ever executed in real estate history. A reminder that in this business, it's not the buildings that win. It's the players who know when to walk away. Blackstone had already shocked the world once, but they weren't done, not even close. Because then came the crown jewel, Hilton Hotels, a titan of global hospitality. A portfolio of 2,800 hotels across 76 countries. A 90-year-old brand recognized in every business district and resort corridor on Earth. Blackstone acquired Hilton for $26 billion in cash at the absolute height of the market. The announcement hit like a bomb. Analysts said the price was too high, the leverage was too aggressive, the timing suicidal. But Blackstone wasn't buying a hotel chain. They were buying a global operating system built on flags, brands, and franchise agreements that printed cash when aligned with the right strategy. And Blackstone knew how to unlock that strategy. Blackstone installed a new leadership team led by Chris Nassetta, a CEO obsessed with efficiency, culture, and global brand architecture. They cut corporate fat, simplified decision-making, and rebuilt Hilton's internal processes from the ground up. This wasn't cost-cutting for survival. It was cost-cutting for speed. The world didn't understand this at the time, but Blackstone did. Owning hotels wasn't the future. Branding and franchising were. Hilton pivoted into an asset-light model, selling physical hotels, collecting franchise fees, and scaling globally without heavy capex. Margins expanded dramatically. Cash flow skyrocketed. Risk collapsed. Under Blackstone's ownership, Hilton added 1,000 plus hotels, expanded into Asia at breakneck speed, and strengthened its luxury plus lifestyle portfolio. They doubled down on loyalty, Hilton Honors, turning it into one of the most powerful travel programs on Earth. When the financial system collapsed in 2008, Blackstone didn't panic. They had already negotiated 6-year debt maturities on the Hilton deal, a masterstroke that bought them time while the world burned. In 2013, Hilton went public in what was then the largest hotel IPO in history. Over the next several years, as Blackstone sold down its position, the numbers were staggering. More than $14 billion returned to investors. One of the greatest private equity real estate victories of all time. A deal once mocked, that became a legend. For Blackstone, Hilton and Equity Office weren't just two giant trades, they were proof of concept, a blueprint for a new kind of real estate dominance. Control the platform, optimize operations, scale globally, use sophisticated capital structures, exit with generational returns. Hilton wasn't just a crown jewel, it was the formula. The moment Blackstone stopped being a participant in real estate and became its architect. Hilton was not the end of Blackstone's rise, it was the beginning of a new era. Because after the crown jewel victory, after the $14 billion payday, after they proved they could take a global brand, rebuild it, and sell it for a fortune, Blackstone didn't slow down, they accelerated. The world was in chaos, the financial system was collapsing, banks were failing, credit evaporated, most investors ran for cover. But Blackstone? They saw something else. They saw opportunity in the chaos. Prime properties, available at fire sale prices, distressed assets crying out for rescue, mismanaged portfolios begging for operational mastery, and a market so beaten down that courage became a competitive advantage. This was their moment. The moment the bold separated from the timid. The moment decades of preparation could be unleashed. The moment Blackstone transformed fear into fortune. The GFC didn't stop Blackstone, it propelled them to the next level. Where others saw risk, Blackstone saw control, scale, and opportunity. Equity Office and Hilton weren't just deals, they were blueprints for platform investing, a strategy that would dominate every sector of real estate for decades to come. After the smoke of the global financial crisis settled, Blackstone didn't just rebuild, they reimagined the game itself. This was no longer about buying a building here or a hotel there. They were constructing platforms of scale empires that could dominate entire markets, control sectors, and generate cash flows that would last decades. Imagine this. Millions of homes foreclosed. Values down 30, 40, 50%. To others, it looked like devastation. To Blackstone, it looked like entry point. They bought homes by the thousands, entire neighborhoods, rebuilding them, renting them, and assembling a national single-family rental platform, a multi-billion-dollar machine born from the wreckage of the crisis. And it wasn't just single-family. Blackstone went deeper. Multi-family Sunbelt apartments, workforce housing, a full-spectrum residential empire. In 2012, they launched Invitation Homes, scooping up tens of thousands of foreclosed single-family homes in the ashes of the housing crash. Where the masses saw broken houses and toxic debt, Blackstone saw scale, predictability, and domination. Within 5 years, Invitation Homes became America's largest single-family rental platform, a machine that turned chaos into billions. IPO in 2017, partial exits by 2019. Across the Atlantic, Logicor was consolidating warehouses from London to Warsaw, crafting a logistics empire built for the rise of e-commerce. In 2015, they made a big move in Germany, purchased 10 warehouse assets, 400,000 square meters, in core logistics hubs like Düsseldorf, Berlin, Frankfurt. By 2017, the platform sold to the China Investment Corporation for €12.25 billion, cementing Blackstone's mastery of industrial scale. At home, Link Logistics grew into one of the largest US industrial landlords, controlling last-mile warehouses that powered the nation's online economy. The assets spanned 17 countries, with over 70% concentrated in major markets: UK, Germany, France, and Southern Europe. Blackstone built Logicor via 50-plus acquisitions, more than just a few big buys. They aggressively bought into the logistics wave. Student housing came next. Blackstone snapped up portfolios of EDR and in 2022 took American campus communities private for $12.8 billion, dominating purpose-built campuses with predictable, recession-resistant cash flows, a new frontier of real estate income that could withstand any downturn. But they didn't stop at walls and roofs. They went deeper, building life sciences labs, biotech campuses, and data centers, the infrastructure of the future QTS in 2021. AirTrunk in 2024 to 2025. Power plants, cell towers, assets that would generate long-duration cash flows, fueled by structural, secular trends in technology, AI, and cloud computing. Every move was a lesson learned from EQ Office and Hilton. Real estate wasn't just property, it was brands, systems, and operational mastery. By the mid-2000s, Blackstone controlled every major corner of real estate: residential, office, hotels, industrial, logistics, student housing, life sciences, digital infrastructure. They had taken the fear of 2008, the panic of a world in collapse, and transformed it into decades of dominance, creating a platform that could move markets, dictate terms, and rewrite the rules of real estate forever. The logistics wave hit in 2019 and Blackstone hit harder. They acquired $18.7 billion of US logistics assets from GLP, splitting the portfolio between opportunistic BREP funds and Bright. Some assets were distressed, some stabilized, some needed operational mastery, others delivered instant cash flow. Together, they doubled down on the e-commerce boom, controlling key last-mile infrastructure from coast to coast. Residential income wasn't overlooked. 22, they acquired PS Business Parks for $7.6 billion. These weren't just office parks, they were flex industrial hubs, suburban campuses, perfectly positioned for growing businesses. Assets like these became the backbone of Blackstone's Core Plus strategy. Blending stabilized income with the potential for operational improvement, retail was next. Blackstone moved to privatize Retail Opportunity Investments Corp. For around $4 billion. 93 grocery-anchored shopping centers on the West Coast defensive. Recession-resistant, cash flow machines. Blackstone wasn't chasing hype, they were building resilient, predictable income streams. What sets Blackstone apart isn't just smart deals, it's massive capital and asset scale. At last count, Blackstone's real estate arm managed more than $600 billion globally across thousands of properties. With that scale comes advantages most competitors simply lack. First, access to capital. They can raise tens of billions of dollars at a time, money to deploy when markets collapse, when sellers are desperate, when others can't act. For example, in 2024, Blackstone deployed over $25 billion into real estate alone. Second, information and market access. With boots on the ground globally, Blackstone sees mispriced assets. Earlier recent internal pitch documents 12,000 plus assets across 37 countries and a network effect of market insight. Third, operational scale. Owning thousands of properties allows cost efficiencies, centralized platform systems, and the ability to restructure assets at scale. Scale also gives them optionality. They can wait, they can move fast, they can unload when needed. Smaller players often get squeezed. Ownership of assets is only half the story. Take the case of the Willis Tower in Chicago. Blackstone bought it in 2015 for $1.3 billion and deployed a $500 million renovation, improving amenities, repositioning the asset, and unlocking incremental returns. The bigger you are, the more you can buy, but also the more you have to manage. Complexity, scale, global operations, they all add risk. So what does this mean for you as an investor, as a developer, or as someone studying the real estate industry? 1. Scale matters. Access to capital matters even more. 2. Trends matter. Betting on where the market is going, not just where it is. 3. Execution matters. Owning an asset isn't enough. Improving it, operating it, repositioning it makes the difference. 4. Patience matters. Thinking in decades, not quarters. Blackstone didn't just get lucky, they built a system, theme plus timing plus scale plus execution, and because they did, they dominate real estate. When you're the landlord to entire industries, logistics, rental housing, data infrastructure, you're not following the market. You're shaping the market. Thanks for watching. If you found this insightful, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for our next deep dive into real estate's biggest players.